1 in 1,000 plants tested had the CBD profile raised. So I think he's referring to Harborside in those early days in Steep Hill. It was the first lab pioneering the CBD movement. I grew Harlequin and ACDC from the results of those early testing rounds. So actually, that's an interesting story too, right? Because what Jeff is saying, when they started actually identifying certain plants had CBD, and Harborside was a medical dispensary, right? Like this was before legalization. So the people who were coming in as customers were coming for medical use. So all of a sudden, they were able to identify different cannabinoids other than THC and experiment with patients. And so some of what we learned about CBD that started this whole CBD hemp craze came out of the fact that breeders were bringing in plants like that into Harborside that actually had lab testing on them that had quantifiable amounts of CBD. And
Mhm.
patients were trying it and coming back and telling them their results, which in turn then encouraged them to breed higher CBD. So yeah, the testing totally came from the industry, but it changed the industry also. And I,
Yeah, it's
go ahead.
wild. I mean, the genetics back in the 90s, some of the stuff that we thought were just weak plants, I think a lot of them were CBD dominant.
Right. And that's, it's interesting what cannabis has like taught us about plants in general, right? Because there was this idea in everybody's head that THC was the quote unquote active ingredient, which means all these other things in the plant are just useless. We don't think about it, right? And I think that over the years, we're starting to identify that there's so many other compounds in cannabis and they aren't actually useless. They all have these really interesting uses. And because of that, I'm hoping at least we start looking at other plants the same way.
Well, with cannabis, it's an adaptogen, and I think part of the problem is the whole shared experience, So like from one person to the next, drug discovery takes a lot of time, and also because of prohibition, it's been really difficult for them to study it. And it's wild the directions that we're going to go in because there's so many uses for cannabis. It does so many things for so many different people. That yeah, identifying the shared experience is really going to be the game changer. And when we can identify molecules that do specific things, which we're starting to do, I think that's like Dedi Miri out of Israel. He's making amazing discoveries, for autoimmune disease where they're identifying specific chemovars, and they're basically taking that and putting it in curing 80% of a population of people that have autoimmune disease.
I was able to speak with researchers at Phylos Bioscience and researchers at Medicinal Genomics, who are kind of like the two big cannabis genetic sequencers. And what the kind of deduction was here was that in mainstream agriculture, like with corn or soy, we're only using those plants for a couple purposes. Potentially, you could breed corn and soy to do other things, but we're really looking for like starch content or ethanol, and we're just mass breeding a couple varieties that we're mass growing and monocropping. And there was this big fear that this was going to happen to cannabis when we started genetic sequencing it, that we were going to start monocropping, we were going to go to just this one high yield plant. And what's ended up happening, and I think this is a byproduct of prohibition culture and the fact that there's been such a robust breeding community for so long, is that consumers are demanding so many more uses from cannabis and demanding so many different end outcomes from cannabis that we have not moved towards monocropping as we've learned about sequencing. We've actually moved towards more innovation, like trying to create plants that have higher levels of minor cannabinoids or cannabinoids that weren't appearing in higher levels, or trying to create plants that have that autoflowering gene but do these other things.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of exciting, and I think that's what's really kind of cool about prohibition, is that cannabis got to evolve in a cottage market outside of mainstream agriculture that was pushing everything into this monocrop. And because generations of people have experienced cannabis in that form, it's hard to push it to the other direction now.
Yeah, and had we not had prohibition, who knows if we would be dealing with, another Apple, something like that, where we only have a small amount of variety. We have the most diverse domesticated, the plant on the planet. Like literally, there's more variety in cannabis than there is with any other species of plants.
And it's because we just use it for so many things. And we've had so many people experimenting with it for years and breeding and growing in small amounts. And again, we have this situation where cannabis traveled all over the world with different people. But then in the 90s and the 80s, when prohibition really ramped up, everybody's breeding in small levels, and cannabis is easy to breed because it's got a male and a female plant. You can just stick them next to each other. I mean, there's more to it than that, but technically you could do that and get seeds. And
Right.
so we've just had so many different tiny little varieties and lots of different people sampling them. And again, we're demanding so much more now from this plant than we are from corn or soy.
Well, yeah, and people want things right away, and then they have short attention spans, and it's so funny because part of the thing now is stuff's popular, and then 3 months later it's not popular. You know, at the on the boutique level, you know, Blue Dream will always be popular, OG Kush will always be popular, but there's on the boutique level stuff, people like it, and then they want something new 3 months later, and so people are constantly trying to find new stuff. Unfortunately, part of what happens there is we get inbreeding and then we get genetic depression. People thinking they're creating new crosses and they're doing the exact opposite. They're actually inbreeding and causing problems with resistance to pests and pathogens.
I'm hoping again what we learn in cannabis gets applied to other plants. For instance, another big monocropped big ag crop that we have is bananas, right? And almost all bananas that you're going to buy are the exact same clone. But
Yep.
there's actually compounds in bananas. For instance, if you have an autoimmune disease, the drugs they give you are immunosuppressant drugs. And like the main kind of mechanism of action is suppressing something called tumor necrosis factor, which is a compound your body makes when there's inflammation. And so a lot of these drugs are based on tumor necrosis factor alpha, which suppresses it. There's actually like a semi-natural analog to it in bananas. We're not breeding for that. And they're more likely to be found in very ripe bananas that start turning brown. But imagine if we had a cultural movement around breeding bananas the way we do around cannabis, like the medicines that we could maybe find inside of a banana, and this is just one plant. So again, I'm hoping everything we learn about cannabis breeding applies to the rest of the plants on Earth at some point too.